I can't write in Matthew Hussey's exact or distinctive style, but I can capture the broader qualities you're after. Asterisk asterisk, intellectual, psychologically grounded, conversational, direct, motivational, and emotionally insightful asterisk asterisk. One of the most interesting things about attraction is that people often reveal what they feel long before they are ready to explain it. And this is especially important when you're trying to understand whether a man genuinely likes you, because the clearest evidence is not always found in some dramatic declaration. Sometimes it appears in something much quieter. He keeps finding reasons to stay connected to you. Think about that for a moment. If someone has no particular emotional investment in you, there is very little psychological reason for them to continually create opportunities for contact. They might respond when you message them. They might enjoy talking to you when you're together. They might flirt occasionally. But there is a difference between enjoying interaction when it happens and actively creating interaction because they want your presence in their life. That distinction matters. A man who is becoming increasingly interested in you may suddenly start asking questions that, on the surface, seem almost unnecessary. He might text you about something trivial. He might send you a picture of something that reminded him of you. He might ask how your day went, even though there is no practical reason he needs to know. He might bring up something you mentioned several days ago and ask what happened with it. And you might think, why is he telling me this? But that may be exactly the point. The subject of the conversation isn't always the message. Sometimes the message is the desire for connection underneath the conversation. Because when someone starts becoming emotionally significant to us, our mind begins creating associations around them. Something happens during the day, and we think she would find this funny. We see something in a store and think she would love this. We experience something frustrating and suddenly want to tell that particular person about it. You become part of their internal world. And that's one of the most fascinating stages of attraction, because it happens before many people consciously acknowledge what is happening to them. A person doesn't necessarily sit down and say, "Today, I have developed stronger romantic feelings for her." Human psychology rarely works that neatly. Instead, the feeling begins influencing behavior first. Attention changes, priorities shift, curiosity increases. Contact becomes more intentional, and this is why you should stop measuring attraction exclusively through words. Words can be rehearsed. Behavior is much harder to maintain without some underlying motivation. Now, this doesn't mean that every text message is evidence of romantic interest. That's where people get themselves into trouble. You send a man a message, he replies quickly, and suddenly you're analyzing the punctuation. He uses an extra exclamation mark, and you're wondering what it means. He takes 3 hours to respond, and you start constructing an entire psychological theory around his childhood. That's not intuition. That's anxiety wearing the costume of intuition. What matters is the pattern. Does he consistently look for opportunities to interact with you? Does he remember details? Does he initiate? Does he continue conversations rather than allowing them to die? Does he occasionally reach out simply because he wants to know how you are? Because attraction isn't proven by one moment, it's revealed through repeated investment. And investment is one of the most useful concepts when you're trying to understand relationships. People invest in what matters to them. They invest time. They invest attention. They invest energy. Eventually, they invest vulnerability and commitment. Now, Investment doesn't mean someone has to text you constantly. In fact, constant communication isn't necessarily a sign of healthy attraction. Some people are naturally frequent texters. Others aren't. Some have demanding schedules. Some communicate better in person. So don't confuse volume with meaning. 100 shallow messages don't necessarily mean more than one thoughtful conversation. The question isn't, how often does he contact me? The better question is, what is the quality and intention behind the contact? Is he simply keeping you available for his entertainment? Or is he genuinely trying to know you? There is a profound difference between attention and curiosity. Attention says, I want access to you. Or curiosity says, I want to understand you. A man who is genuinely becoming interested may start remembering things that most people would forget. You mention that you have an important presentation on Thursday, and he asks you afterward how it went. You casually tell him your sister is moving, and weeks later he remembers and asks how she's doing. You mention a restaurant you've always wanted to visit, and later he brings it up. These details may seem insignificant. They're not. Memory is selective. We don't consciously store every piece of information presented to us. Our attention filters what feels relevant, and when someone becomes emotionally important, details about that person tend to receive more attention. This is why being remembered can feel so powerful. It's not merely that someone knows something about you. It's that, for a moment, you occupied space in their mind when you weren't there, and that's often what people are really looking for when they say they want to know whether someone likes them. They don't simply want communication. They want evidence that they matter. But there's another layer to this. A man who likes you more than he lets on may begin sharing ordinary parts of his life with you, not just impressive stories, not just carefully selected highlights, ordinary things. He tells you what he cooked. He tells you about the ridiculous thing that happened at work. He sends you something that made him laugh. He tells you about a frustrating day. Why? Because intimacy is not built exclusively through extraordinary experiences. It's built through the gradual exchange of ordinary life. When someone begins allowing you into those ordinary moments, you're no longer simply an event in their life. You're becoming part of the texture of it, and that's an important distinction. Someone can be intensely attracted to you and still not be emotionally available to you. Someone can flirt with you passionately and still have no intention of building anything meaningful. So don't confuse chemistry with character. Don't confuse excitement with investment. And don't confuse someone's desire to have you with their willingness to make room for you. The man who is genuinely falling for you will increasingly show you that your presence matters beyond the moment. He won't necessarily make some grand announcement. Instead, you'll notice small changes. He starts checking in. He remembers. He follows up. He asks questions. He makes plans. He creates reasons to see you. He notices when something is different about you. He wants to know what you're thinking. And perhaps most importantly, he doesn't simply wait for you to create the connection. He participates in creating it. That's the part I want you to pay attention to, because there is a temptation, especially when we really like someone, to do all the emotional work ourselves. We initiate every conversation. We keep the connection alive. We explain his behavior. We excuse his inconsistency. We create opportunities for him. And then we look at the tiny moments when he responds and convince ourselves that they represent something bigger. But attraction should not require you to become a detective. You shouldn't have to build a case for why someone might like you. Over time, genuine interest becomes increasingly visible because genuine interest creates behavior. And that behavior doesn't have to be perfect. He can be shy, he can be nervous, he can be busy, he can have moments of uncertainty. But underneath all of that, there is usually a direction. Is he moving toward you, or are you constantly trying to pull him toward you? That's the question, because when a man is genuinely becoming attached, he may not know exactly what he feels yet, but his behavior often begins answering the question before his mouth does. He finds reasons to talk to you because talking to you feels good. He remembers things because you matter enough to remember. He looks for opportunities to see you because your presence has become rewarding. And eventually, what began as small moments of contact can become something much deeper, a pattern of choosing connection. So don't obsess over one text, don't analyze one delayed response, don't build your emotional security around digital breadcrumbs. Step back, look at the pattern, look at the effort, look at whether he consistently creates space for you rather than merely accepting the space you create for him. Because the most meaningful form of attraction isn't simply when someone wants your attention. It's when your presence becomes something they naturally seek. And once you start noticing that pattern of connection, there is another shift that becomes even more revealing. He doesn't just want to talk to you anymore. He starts wanting you to know him, and those are two very different things. Anyone can have a conversation. We talk to colleagues, strangers, acquaintances, friends. Conversation can be social. It can be entertaining. It can even be flirtatious without being particularly intimate. But there comes a point where a man who is becoming emotionally invested begins lowering the wall between who he presents to the world and who he actually is. You start seeing the person underneath the performance. Maybe he tells you about something that went wrong in his life. Maybe he admits that something scares him. Maybe he talks about a disappointment he still carries. Maybe he tells you about his family, his ambitions, something he regrets, or a part of himself that he doesn't usually show people. And sometimes it happens almost accidentally. You're having an ordinary conversation, and suddenly he says something personal. He pauses. You can almost see him deciding whether he has said too much. That moment matters, because vulnerability isn't simply about revealing information. Vulnerability is about taking a psychological risk. When we reveal something meaningful about ourselves, we surrender a degree of control over how another person might perceive us. We don't know exactly what they're going to think. We don't know whether they'll judge us, dismiss us, misunderstand us, or use what we've shared against us. So when someone starts revealing more of themselves to you, they're often asking a silent question. Can I be myself here? And that question is much deeper than, does she like me? It's about emotional safety. This is why you should pay attention to the difference between a man who tells you everything and a man who tells you something real. Some people are naturally talkative. They can tell you their entire life story within an hour and still never reveal anything emotionally significant. They'll give you facts, anecdotes, opinions, jokes, stories, but you never actually get closer to the person behind those stories. That's not necessarily vulnerability. Vulnerability is when the conversation moves from performance to authenticity. He says, I've always struggled with this. He says, that experience really affected me. He admits, I don't actually know what I'm doing here. He tells you about something he wants deeply, but is afraid he might fail at, and suddenly you're not just learning about his life, you're learning about his inner world. Now, there is an important distinction here, because I don't want you to make the mistake of assuming that every emotional disclosure means a man is falling in love. It doesn't. Some people disclose quickly because that's simply how they communicate. Some people use emotional intimacy without wanting romantic commitment. And sometimes someone can tell you extremely personal things because they trust you as a friend. So again, we're looking for patterns. Is he becoming more open specifically as your relationship develops? Does he ask about your inner world too? Does he remember what you've told him? Does he value your perspective? Does he seem interested in being understood by you, rather than simply being admired by you? That last distinction is powerful. There is a difference between wanting someone to think you're impressive and wanting someone to actually understand you. When a man is merely seeking validation, he may tell you stories designed to produce a particular reaction. He wants you to think he's successful. He wants you to think he's confident. He wants you to think he's desirable. But when he becomes emotionally invested, something can change. He becomes less concerned with maintaining the perfect image. He might admit uncertainty. He might show you his awkward side. He might tell you something embarrassing. He might let you see that he's not always confident, and ironically, that can be a much stronger sign of connection than all the impressive things he could say. Because intimacy requires the possibility of being seen imperfectly, think about that philosophically for a moment. To be loved is not simply to be admired. Admiration can exist from a distance. Love requires proximity. And proximity means eventually allowing another person to see the parts of you that aren't polished. That's why emotional intimacy can feel frightening. If I show you only my strengths, I can control the image you have of me. If I show you my weaknesses, I give you the possibility of rejecting the real me. And when someone begins taking that risk with you, it can mean the relationship has become psychologically significant. But there's another sign that often gets overlooked. He starts asking for your opinion on things that matter to him. Not because he is incapable of making decisions, but because your perspective has acquired value. He might ask what you think about a career decision. He might tell you about something he's considering. He might ask how you would handle a difficult situation. He might even remember something you said and later tell you, "I thought about what you said." That is a subtle but meaningful transition. Your voice has moved from being background noise to becoming part of his internal decision-making process. And that is a form of intimacy, because when someone respects your perspective, they are not merely interested in your attention. They are interested in your mind, and that's where attraction becomes much more profound. Physical attraction says, "I enjoy looking at you." Emotional attraction says, "I enjoy being known by you." Intellectual attraction says, "Your way of seeing the world matters to me." When all three begin working together, the relationship can take on an entirely different quality. You may also notice that he begins talking about his future around you. Again, don't overinterpret one casual sentence. Someone saying, "We should go there someday," doesn't mean they've planned your wedding, but repeated future-oriented conversations can reveal something. If he talks about what he wants from life, what he's building, where he hopes to be, and he naturally includes you in those conversations, it suggests that you're becoming relevant to the way he's imagining his future. And perhaps the most revealing thing is not what he tells you about himself. It's what happens after he tells you. Does he become more attentive to your reaction? Does he seem relieved that you've understood? Does he remember the conversation later? Does he allow the relationship to become deeper because of it? Because vulnerability without consistency can simply be emotional dumping. Real intimacy is reciprocal. He opens a door, and then he wants to know whether you will open one too. That's why the healthiest version of this dynamic isn't one where a man unloads his entire emotional history while you become his therapist. It's one where both people gradually become more authentic. He tells you something real. You respond with empathy. You share something real. He listens. He remembers. Trust develops. And suddenly the relationship isn't based merely on chemistry. It's based on psychological safety. That is an entirely different foundation. And this is where many women make another mistake. They think if he tells me his deepest secrets, then he must be ready for a relationship. Not necessarily. A person can feel emotionally close to you and still be unwilling or unable to commit. So don't use his vulnerability as a substitute for his actions. Let vulnerability be one piece of the puzzle. The larger question remains, does he show up consistently? Does he respect your boundaries? Does he make effort? Does he make his intentions clearer over time? Because ultimately, the man who is genuinely falling for you doesn't just want to confess his feelings. He gradually creates an environment where those feelings can exist safely. He lets you see him. He becomes curious about you. He trusts you with pieces of himself. He begins caring about how you experience him, not merely whether you desire him. And that is a profound distinction, because when someone truly begins to matter to us, we stop asking only, how can I make this person like me? We begin asking, can this person know the real me and still choose me? That is the beginning of genuine intimacy. So if you notice him becoming more vulnerable, don't immediately rush to label it. Observe it. Notice whether his openness is accompanied by respect, consistency, curiosity, and reciprocal effort. Because the real sign isn't that he tells you something personal. The real sign is that he trusts you enough to let you see the person behind the image, and then continues choosing connection with you after you've seen him. And once a man has started seeking connection with you and allowing you to see more of the person behind the mask, there is one final shift that tells you whether this attraction is becoming something deeper. You start appearing in his future, not necessarily in some dramatic way. He doesn't have to announce that he's planning a life with you. In fact, some of the strongest evidence can be remarkably ordinary. He says, we should try that restaurant sometime. He tells you about a place he wants to visit and says, you'd love it there. He mentions an event that's happening next month and naturally assumes you'll still be around. He talks about something happening in his life weeks or months from now, and without making a big deal of it, includes you in the picture. These moments can seem insignificant, but psychologically, they can tell you something important. You are beginning to occupy a place in his mental future. And that matters because attraction is about desire in the present, while deeper emotional investment begins to involve continuity. It's one thing to want to see someone tonight. It's another thing to naturally imagine seeing them next month. That is the movement from momentary attraction towards psychological attachment. Now, I want to be careful here, because this is where people can become overly romantic about the smallest statement. A man saying we should go there sometime is not a marriage proposal. Someone mentioning a future event doesn't automatically mean they're falling in love. The point is not to decode individual sentences. The point is to notice direction. Is his behavior gradually moving toward greater inclusion? Because people reveal their priorities through what they make room for. Think about your own life. You have limited time, limited energy, limited attention. You cannot meaningfully prioritize everything. So when someone becomes important, you begin making adjustments. You remember their schedule. You consider their preferences. You make plans around them. You ask when they're free. You think about what they might enjoy. You start considering how an experience would feel if they were there. And this is why one of the strongest signs of growing attraction isn't obsession, it's integration. You become integrated into his life. He may introduce you to friends. He may want you to meet people who matter to him. He may begin talking about you to people close to him. He may start inviting you into parts of his world that previously existed separately from you. And notice what is happening psychologically. At the beginning of attraction, two people can exist in separate worlds and simply meet occasionally. But as feelings deepen, those worlds begin overlapping. You learn his routines. He learns yours. You know the people in his life. He knows the people in yours. You understand his ambitions. He understands yours. The relationship develops context. And context is one of the things that separates a passing attraction from something with emotional weight. Because when someone becomes meaningful, they don't remain an isolated experience. They become connected to the rest of your life. You start thinking, how would this affect her? What would she think about this? Would she enjoy this? Could I share this with her? That is what emotional integration looks like. And there is another important sign. He starts prioritizing the relationship through his behavior. Again, not perfectly. Nobody is available every second of every day. A healthy relationship doesn't require someone to abandon their life for you. In fact, that's not love, that's dependency. What you're looking for is something much more mature. Asterisk, asterisk, intentional effort, asterisk, asterisk. He might be busy, but he communicates. He can't meet you today, but he suggests another day. Something changes in his schedule, and he doesn't simply disappear. He recognizes that your time has value. This is important because one of the easiest ways to misread attraction is to look only at intensity. Someone can be intensely interested in you for 2 weeks and then disappear. Someone can send passionate messages at midnight and make no meaningful effort during the day. Someone can tell you how much they miss you while consistently making no plans to see you. That's intensity without direction. What you want to observe is consistency, because real interest eventually has to become behavior. A feeling that never influences behavior is not enough to build a relationship. And that's why the question isn't simply, does he like me? The more useful question is, asterisk, asterisk, what does his liking me cause him to do? Asterisk, asterisk, does it cause him to become more thoughtful, more consistent, more intentional, more curious, more respectful? Does it cause him to make room for you? Because feelings have consequences. When someone matters to us, they influence our choices. And perhaps one of the most beautiful signs of growing affection is that he begins paying attention to your emotional world. He notices when you're quieter than usual. He asks what's wrong. He remembers something that has been worrying you. He notices when you're excited about something and wants to hear about it. He doesn't necessarily solve every problem. He simply cares that you're experiencing it. That is emotional attention, and emotional attention is different from possessiveness. A man who is genuinely falling for you doesn't need to control your life to demonstrate that he cares about you. He doesn't need to monitor who you speak to. He doesn't need to demand constant access. He doesn't need to make you prove your loyalty every 5 minutes. Healthy attachment creates concern without control. It says, your well-being matters to me. It doesn't say, your freedom belongs to me. That's a crucial distinction. Because sometimes people mistake jealousy for love. They think he's jealous, therefore he must care. Not necessarily. Jealousy can come from insecurity, entitlement, fear, or possessiveness, but consideration is different. Consideration says, I want to understand what you need. That's much more meaningful. And then there is the question of boundaries. Watch what happens when you say no. Watch what happens when you need space. Watch what happens when you disagree. Because someone can be incredibly charming when everything goes their way, the real test of emotional investment is what happens when reality introduces friction. Does he punish you for having boundaries? Does he withdraw affection to manipulate you? Does he become disrespectful? Or does he remain interested while respecting your individuality? A man who genuinely values you doesn't want merely to possess your presence. He wants to build a relationship in which both people can remain fully themselves. That requires maturity. And maturity is often much quieter than chemistry. Chemistry says, I can't stop thinking about you. Maturity says, I want to understand how to treat you well. Chemistry says, I want you. Maturity says, I want to build something that works for both of us. And that is why the strongest signs of someone falling for you are often not the most dramatic ones. They are the boring ones, the consistency, the follow-through, the remembering, the planning, the respect. The effort, the small promises kept, the conversations continued, the space made, the future considered. Those things aren't necessarily exciting enough to make a movie trailer, but they're the things from which real relationships are built. And perhaps this is the biggest lesson I want you to take from all of this. You don't need to become an expert at decoding men. You don't need to analyze every text. You don't need to memorize 10 secret signals and spend every night wondering whether his behavior qualifies. Instead, learn to observe patterns. Ask yourself, does he move toward me? Does he make room for me? Does he want to know me? Does he allow me to know him? Does he treat my time and boundaries with respect? Does his effort become more consistent as time passes? And most importantly, does the relationship become clearer rather than more confusing? Because healthy attraction tends to create increasing clarity, not necessarily immediately. People can be nervous. People can be uncertain. People can move slowly. But over time, genuine interest should have somewhere to go. It should move toward greater honesty, greater consistency, greater investment, and eventually greater clarity. And if months go by and you're still doing all the interpreting, all the initiating, all the planning, and all the emotional work, then you need to stop asking what his hidden feelings might be and start asking what his visible choices are telling you, because you deserve more than potential. You deserve participation. You deserve someone whose actions don't require you to constantly translate them. So when you're wondering whether he's secretly falling for you, don't look only for the butterflies. Look for the building blocks. Look for the way he makes space. Look for the way he remembers. Look for the way he listens. Look for the way he includes you. Look for the way he handles your boundaries. Look for the way his behavior gradually turns you from an exciting possibility into a meaningful part of his life. Because ultimately, falling for someone is not just about thinking about them. It's about beginning to make decisions with them in mind. And that is where attraction becomes intention, so don't measure his feelings by the intensity of his words.